Mmm.
Hi, welcome back to Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're bringing a lot of solid authors and stuff to add to that to-be-read pile. So let's see who all is bringing in things that are going to keep you up at night and reading all day long. Liv, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Liv, and I write gay, paranormal, and historic romance, and sometimes they're both paranormal and historic at the same time.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. I write primarily historical fantasy, which is what I'll be talking about tonight.
And Ian.
And I'm Ian Randall Strock. I write nonfiction and science fiction, but I'm here tonight because I'm the editor and publisher of Fantastic Books, which is releasing a brand new anthology to the world.
So let's start talking a little bit, just kind of what's the setup? What's the promise of all these different books, all these different works? And Liv, I'm going to start with you. So with your latest let's just talk a little bit about what kind of a world people are going to fall into. What's the setup people are going to walk into?
So just so you're warned, I'm going to take every opportunity to show off this cover because I think it's fantastic. The book is called The Lighthouse Keeper, and it is a historical fantasy paranormal set in 1898. Starts in San Francisco, travels to Seattle. There are witches, there's magic, there's a little bit of heat because it's a romance. And there are still, it's the first book in what will at least be a duology, if not more. And so there are still sort of things that I'm working out about the magical world piece of it, but certain people have certain powers and they use them to do certain things, and not always are they good things.
What kind of magic can people walk into in this world?
The practitioners are basically second-class citizens. The general population knows that witches exist, but they don't really approve. Like, our point of view character gets cut out of his family when he develops magical powers. And the people who are witches from a family of witches or who spontaneously develop power, it's generally a specific thing that they're talented at. Like, our point of view character can change objects from one shape to another. And he considers it a party trick because, I get drunk and I can change a rock into a bird. Go me, But in the course of the story, it comes in actually very handy. Change a rock into a key that opens the door. Different characters have the mother in the story is a finder. Like, she has the gift of being able to sort of track down people who are missing. And everybody's got one of the characters is weather worker, which means she doesn't create weather, but she can influence the weather and sort of nudge bad storms out of the path they're taking into a different path and that kind of thing.
Yeah, with the number of outdoor events I do, I need to hire her.
Yeah, weatherworking is pretty handy, yeah.
So Fraser, let's talk a little bit about what we're falling into with yours.
What we've got is my book, 19 Infinity. I had been planning to bring out a collection of short stories. Like I said, I do historical fantasy. I was going to put together a bunch of my previously published stories and a handful of new ones. Fair-sized book. Then I noticed that a bunch of them came out in the 20th century, hence the title 19 Infinity. And I decided I would go with that as a subset. They are not they are not linked. There are two that are set in the same universe with the same central character. Otherwise, they are all in their own little world. One is an alternate history. Most of them take place in our history, except a little magic has gotten into the world somehow. They run from the 1930s through the 1990s. I realized when I put it together that I hadn't written anything in the 1940s, but it was a little late to try to come up with something, so there's a small gap.
All right, Ian, what are you bringing in?
We're launching Jewish Futures, Stories from the World's Oldest Diaspora, which exists because Michael Burstein said, Jack Dan edited two anthologies called Wandering Stars in the 1970s and 80s, and it's time for a new anthology of Jewish short stories. And so we've got the anthology. We've got Jewish extraterrestrials. We've got zombies that eat brisket. We've got a baby robot golem, stories of the last Jew, and some happy, some sad, a lot of fascinating stuff, and I'm really thrilled with it. Really very excited.
Who are some of the contributors for this one?
Right? Who are some of the contributors? We got Esther Friesner, Harry Turtledove, Leah Sipis, Susan Schwartz, Robert Greenberger, Randy Dawn, Stephen Silver, and we launched it as a Kickstarter campaign, so a lot of the big names were already there when the book was being put together. But then after we funded, we opened it up for open submissions. So not all of the authors are Jewish. And I'm really, really thrilled that we have a story by Samantha Katz, someone none of you have ever heard of, because not only is it her first sale, but she is currently a New York City public high school student.
That's crazy.
And it was, we didn't know who she was when we bought the story. We bought the story, and then she sent us her bio, and then we said, wow. And I said, oh, geez, I better run the contract by your parents.
Yeah, but those are always fun to meet new voices like that, too. So,
oh, I'm thrilled by it. And it's a wonderful story, too.
So, Fraser, let's talk a little bit about some of the stories. Who are some of the people we're going to meet and hang out as we start diving into some of these tales?
Okay, the earliest story, which is set in 1936, is Leave the World to Darkness. The central character, although she's not the point of view character, is Aggie Baxter. She is a sob sister, a reporter who writes human interest stories. She wants to do serious, more hard-hitting reporting. She has heard a story that Tesla is working on something using the late Thomas Edison's secret technology. So she has dragged her wealthy boyfriend, Rod, along with her to investigate. And they wind up in a fight between Tesla and Edison's ghost with Nazi shadow invaders. The shadow concept started first, and I couldn't make a story out of it until I set it into the 1930s. I love Aggie. She is a high-energy, ambitious, intelligent character, and Rod's just sort of dragged along behind her, and I had a lot of fun with that one. There are two stories dealing with the wandering Jew who works with a lot of grumbling as a kind of private investigator. There are a lesbian couple of investigators in the 1950s. This was my one alternate history. Magic works, everyone knows it, and gay marriage is normal. And it's called No One Can Slay Her. And then there is this one I owe a lot of help to my wife for. It was in the 1990s. We have a woman working in IT, which my wife does, and she is working on a revolutionary new program, but there are strange things going on. It is probably the lowest level of magic in any fantasy story I have written, which may be why I was never able to sell it to anyone, but I'm quite fond of it. That's the most downbeat of the collection of stories. Mostly they're pretty cheerful.
All right, Ian, let's dive into some of the stories we're going to be getting out of the anthology as well. Yeah, who are some of the characters? What are some of the kind of stories and themes?
Tell you about some of the stories.
So let's talk about some of the stories, some of the characters. Who all we're going to be hanging out with in this anthology?
Well, Leah Sipis' story, From Her House, is a fascinating take on artificial intelligences. And in this case, the artificial intelligence that runs the house decides that people living in it aren't quite as religious as they ought to be. So that's a funny one. Samantha's Shema, Samantha Katz, the high school student I mentioned, hers is a little bit darker. It's a story of the last Jew. Actually, we did 2 of the last Jew stories. You don't normally do 2 of the same, but Jordan King Lacroix, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He's Australian. Also follows the last Jew, but his is a more upbeat take on it, set in Australia where he lives. We've got a climb up Mount Everest with a religious Jewish mountain climber and a religious Palestinian mountain climber working together to spread the love, as it were. Matzo Ball Soup for the Verschlugged Soul by Randy Dawn, in which we are celebrating second Passover on an alien planet, and one of the aliens comes to dinner because he wants to convert to Judaism.
Yeah, I can see that from Randy.
Yeah.
All right, Liv, why don't we dive a little bit deeper into who all we're going to be meeting in this story?
So, the point of view character is Vincent Fairchild, and the first line goes something like, "My name is Vincent Fairchild, and I am too pretty for my own good. At least my mother always said so." And that's sort of his thing, is he's incredibly handsome, and his Fairchild in this world, the Fairchild last name is like Rockefeller, maybe, as far as associated with money and power. But because he developed magical tendencies, he was kicked out of his family, and but he can still trade on the Fairchild last name. He gets by on charm and the illusion of social clout, and has a job with the Witches' Council in San Francisco, where he is basically involved in schmoozing the norms, the muggles, and trying to work as he's working as a liaison between the Witches' Council and the San Francisco government. And he has a bit of trouble one night and ends up in a place where he doesn't really know where he is or how he got here, because basically he was really drunk, he thinks, or maybe drugged. And as a result of that, the head of the Witches' Council, who recognizes his value, even if he doesn't really, needs to get him out of town, because the sort of chain of events caused by the night would have the rest of the council sort of strip him of his magical powers and send him off to die. And he doesn't want that. She doesn't want that. She thinks he's valuable. So she sends him up to a lighthouse up on the north of the city of Seattle, which in 1898 wasn't much more than a cow town. And he's supposed to find at the lighthouse somebody there possesses an object called the Ferox core, and there's not a whole lot of specificity about what this magical object can do, except that it's powerful and it's bad. And so he shows up there and he meets Della Gallagher, who is apparently the guy who possessed it has died. Della's husband, Martin, has died. And so he shows up. He's trying to find the Ferox core. The people in San Francisco really had no clue about what was really going on at this lighthouse. They thought Della and Martin's child was a child, and he's not. He's in his 20s. He's incredibly handsome and incredibly powerful in his own right. And so things sort of go off from there, because Vincent and Rafe Gallagher, the son, are obviously immediately attracted to each other, although Rafe has the social skills of a turnip, but he's madly powerful. And so, yeah. That's who you'll be meeting.
So who's the big love in?
It has a happy ending. It all works out.
All works out in the end?
But the fun is how they get there.
So, Ian, I'm going to start with you on this one. I mean, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about tonight, there's a lot of magic. There's a lot of really kind of core themes here between, your anthology, Fraser's anthology, Liv's story and things like this. But when we look at some of these ideas of magic and folklore and things like this. When we contemplate that, why do you think that we enjoy exploring that kind of a power and both what it shows us and what it reveals to us? You know, how when we love these stories of magic or power abilities or even just pure folklore, you know, what is it about you that you think speaks to readers?
I think it's the stories that we've been telling ourselves and each other for our entire history. It's our shared mythology. It's comforting because we've grown up with them. I mean, I'm a science fiction guy, and I love the brand new, the outlandish, the things we haven't experienced before. But there is something comforting and powerful in the stories that we know, even if we change them. Magic, mythology, even religion, they're all the stories that we've told to make ourselves feel comfortable, feel safe.
What about you, Liv? What are your thoughts on why we love these stories so much? What do they do for us?
You know, I think they give us a different way. I mean, at least in terms of the story that I wrote, it's a different way of looking at the past. And it gives you, gave me a way of looking at social status and the importance of family, whether it's natural family or found family, in a way that's sort of more entertaining than actually, you know, I mean, I could write just a history of San Francisco, but that's been done already, or a history of Seattle, also been done. But this gives you sort of a different spin on how to examine, you know, pretty important human themes.
Fraser?
For me, part of the fun of writing historical fantasy, and hopefully and also for me reading it, is like the little historical details. Somebody driving around in a car without seatbelts in the Savage Year, because they were optional back in the late 60s. In the 1980s story, Death is Like a Box of Chocolates. One unfortunate doomed soul walks his sister right up to the gate of the plane where she is going to fly with. There is no security. He's able to get to the baggage carousel and then just steals a piece of luggage and nobody notices. Unfortunately, he picked the wrong luggage, but it's so different in so many ways, from the slang, the smoking, the attitudes, but it's close enough I can still recognize them more easily than if it were the 1600s. And for me, that's a lot of fun, hopefully for readers too.
So I'm going to throw one last question out to you guys, and it's going to be open call as to who wants to take on it first. And this, of course, is one of my favorite questions every time. You know, again, when we, as writers, as creators, as producers, we're always going to trip down some rabbit hole. There's something that's going to pull us in that we're going to follow down, something that we learn from, whether it's part of the process or just some little fun tidbit that comes out of the process. So what was that rabbit hole you tripped over and fell down this time? Who wants that one first? Now, this is class. Don't make me start calling on you guys.
Did I show off my cover yet? Sorry.
All right, so you get to go first.
I really like this cover.
Yes.
I work with the same cover artist for all my books, and she just really hit it out of the park. No, what prompted this book, what I wanted to do was write a series about people with magic, and I wanted to base it in a boarding house so that there would be, like, each book could feature a different sort of couple, and one of the guys would always live in the boarding house, right? And that whole culture, that sort of 19th century, I mean, there are whole books written about what it was like to live in a boarding house, and so that was interesting. And that's kind of where I started from. And then I posted on the Facebook reader group that I have, like, would you rather read a Gothic? I was interested in reading writing something Gothic? Do you want a Gothic romance set in New Orleans, London, or San Francisco? And they voted for San Francisco. So with nothing more inspired than that, I was like, boarding house in San Francisco, here we go. And then 2 chapters in, the main character gets sent to Seattle, but we'll get back to the boarding house eventually. Did that answer your question at all?
Is there something you learned about going to boarding houses in San Fran at the time?
I mean, I think that it was culturally different. It was one of the only ways, respectable ways, women could make a living in the 19th century. Sometimes they would be married, sometimes they wouldn't. And it was incredibly difficult. It was exhausting work. It was never ending. And you often didn't make enough to make ends meet. And then the boarding house would close and go out of business and somebody else would pick it up. And so it really was sort of a sort of cultural relic that we don't, I mean, it was different. It's different from apartments now, where you rent an apartment and you have your own kitchen and you have your own stuff and you do your own thing. This was like you shared a bath, you shared the whoever the boarding house proprietor was cooked at least one meal a day and everybody ate together. And so it's something we don't see anymore. So that to me was interesting.
Fraser, how about you? What was your rabbit hole?
On this particular book, 19 Infinity, there wasn't one. None of the stories other than the IT-based one really required a lot of research. For Southern Discomfort, which is set in 1973 and should be coming out next year, knock on wood, I went down all kinds of rabbit holes. History of Italians in America, history of the Irish in America, history of miscegenation, and a great many others besides that. And I like history. I like reading history. I read a lot of it for fun. So it's no great sacrifice when I find myself going down some strange path, because it's usually interesting.
So the rabbit hole with Jewish Futures was the Kickstarter campaign, because it funded so quickly and far beyond my expectations, which is not a complaint. I'm not complaining. I'm thrilled. We did great. But it meant we got to the stage where I had to produce a limited edition hardcover that's coming out soon. And we got so far that I foolishly said, well, we funded this much, so we funded the next book. So after this one launches August 7th, and we're doing a signing at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts on August 23rd, then Michael Burstein, the editor, and I have to get together and figure out what the next book is going to be, since we've promised to produce another one. But that's not really a rabbit hole like you were talking about. So I'm going to go off of this book to talk about the most recent rabbit hole I found myself in, which is I wrote an article about my relationship with Isaac Asimov. I worked for Asimov Science Fiction Magazine the last 3 years of his life. So he was in the office every week. I wrote an article about Isaac, and in the article, talking about our meeting, I wrote, we laughed, and we're friends for 3 years. We'd said something and it was funny and we laughed and we stopped laughing. We were friends. The editor, going by the AP style, which says we don't like punctuation, we have to save column inches, said, no, there's no comma in that sentence. So we argued back and forth 3 times. I'm right, he was wrong, but I've been the editor enough to know that when I'm the writer and the editor says you're wrong, you have to eventually say, okay, the editor wins. So he took the comma out of my sentence. So I have written 25,000 words of a book on punctuation that my agent says needs another 5,000 words before he can submit it, but he thinks he's going to be able to sell it. That's an incredibly deep rabbit hole for 1 comma in one 7-word sentence. 8 words.
That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, that definitely qualifies as a rabbit hole and deciding what hill to die on, right?
Oh, yeah. Punctuation. My serial commas are a requirement.
That is going to be the subtitle for it, right?
Yeah. But I talk about the other punctuation marks too. It's not just the commas. And as soon as I have it done, and my agent, I mean, this is the first thing I've sent him in a long time that he seemed excited about, that he thinks he can sell. So I'm hopeful there. if I ever get a chance to be a writer. But whenever I sit down to write, I hear all my authors screaming, "Why aren't you working on my book?" It makes it tough to be a writer. So if you want to be a writer, don't be an editor.
Sage advice. Sage advice. Well, it sounds like we've got plenty of stuff to add to everybody's to-be-read piles. But before we get out of here, let's make sure they remember what the book is and where to get it. And Ian, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Jewish Futures, Stories from the World's Oldest Diaspora, edited by Michael A. Burstein. Check us out on fantasticbooks.biz. Right now it's on the front page. We've got links to all the usual retail outlets, and the ebook will be available directly from us on publication date August 7th. Despite the 90 or so people who tried to download, the fact that there's no ebook available yet for $0.
Fraser, where can we find this latest release?
19 Infinity, like my other books, is available in paperback on Amazon. You can find it for pre-order. It comes out on the 14th in ebook on Amazon and most other retailers. You can also look me up on FraserSherman.com. That is Fraser. Note the strange spelling.
And Liv.
So The Lighthouse Keeper is available at all ebook retailers. It is available in print. And you can find out more at my website, livrancourt.com. You can find me on, not that old social media thing that shall be not named Twitter anymore. But I'm on TikTok and Facebook and all social media, Instagram, all social media is a variation of Liv Rancourt, liv.rancourt, all small, some big, whatever.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculative-fiction-academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course, your ConTinual. And go stack up those to-be-read piles.